It was a long drive, and the interstate seemed endless, with the black ribbon of asphalt stretching into nothingness. I was driving back home from a weekend trip with my girlfriend, Melissa. She was asleep in the passenger seat, her head leaning against the window, the soft hum of the engine lulling her into a peaceful nap. It was just me, the road, and the growing ache in my bladder. I glanced at the gas gauge. It was hovering just above empty, so when I saw the faint glow of a neon sign ahead, my relief was palpable. Pit Stop Cafe and Gas. The sign blinked in an eerie red and blue glow. It looked old, almost decrepit, but at this point, I didn't care. I nudged Melissa awake as I pulled in. She groaned, rubbing her eyes. "Where are we?" "Just a gas station." "Need gas and a bathroom," I replied, pulling up to one of the pumps. The place was unsettlingly quiet. The single flickering streetlight illuminated the cracked pavement, and the building itself looked like it hadn't seen a renovation since the 70s. The windows were dark, but there was a faint light coming from inside. "Stay here," I told Melissa. She nodded sleepily, staying in the car as I stepped out. The air was cold and heavy, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The pump looked ancient, with a rusted nozzle and faded numbers. I swiped my card, but the screen blinked, "See attendant inside." Sighing, I walked toward the building. As I approached the door, I noticed a faded, "Open 24 hours" sign hanging crookedly. Inside, a dim yellow light flickered, casting long, shifting shadows over the aisles of dusty shelves stocked with expired snacks and canned goods. A small bell jingled as I pushed the door open. The smell hit me first, stale air mixed with something sour. The counter was unmanned, but I could hear faint shuffling sounds coming from somewhere in the back. "Hello," I called out. My voice echoed unnaturally in the empty store. The shuffling stopped. A man emerged from the back room, his face pale and drawn, eyes hollow like he hadn't slept in weeks. He didn't say a word, just stared at me. The pump says I need to see the attendant," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded slowly, then pointed toward a clipboard on the counter. "Sign your name," he muttered, his voice hoarse and raspy. "Sign my name? For what?" I asked, frowning. "Rules," he replied cryptically, his gaze shifting to the darkened window behind me. Uneasy, I scrawled my name on the clipboard. The man nodded again, then disappeared back into the shadows without another word. I turned to leave but stopped when I noticed something strange. The wall behind the counter was lined with Polaroid photos. Each one showed a car, a driver, and a date. The dates stretched back decades. I squinted, leaning closer to one of the more recent ones. The driver in the photo looked eerily familiar. He was wearing the same jacket I was wearing. My stomach churned. I backed away and hurried out the door, the bell jangling behind me like a warning. Back at the car, Melissa was awake, looking nervous. "What's taking so long?" she asked. "Let's just get out of here," I muttered, my hands trembling as I started the engine. As I pulled away, the headlights caught something in the rearview mirror, a figure standing in the middle of the road, watching us. It was the man from inside, but he wasn't alone. Behind him, shadows began to take form. Dozens of them, maybe more, all standing still, their faces turned toward us. Melissa screamed as I hit the gas, the car roaring down the empty highway. I didn't dare look back again. After a few miles, I finally started to calm down. I glanced at Melissa, her face pale and tear-streaked. "What's wrong?" I asked. She pointed to the rearview mirror. "There's someone in the back seat." I whipped my head around, but the back seat was empty. "Melissa, there's no one there," I snapped, my voice shaking. She stared at me, her eyes wide with terror. "It's him. He's sitting right behind you." I turned back to the road, my heart racing. The car's interior suddenly felt suffocating, the air thick and oppressive. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles white. Then I felt it. A cold, clammy hand rested on my shoulder. I slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt in the middle of the highway. Melissa screamed, and I spun around, ready to fight. But there was nothing there. The car was empty. "Let's go," Melissa whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't argue. I floored it, driving as fast as I could until we reached the lights of a small town. We stopped at a diner, too shaken to continue. When we told the locals about the pit stop, their faces darkened. "That place burned down years ago," one of them said. "A gas station attendant went crazy, killed a bunch of travelers. They say the place is cursed now." I didn't sleep that night, and every time I drive past an old gas station, I can't help but glance at the Polaroid photos on the walls, wondering if my face is still there. I don't usually drive long distances alone, but my sister's wedding was an exception. It was a 6-hour journey, mostly through empty highways and back roads. My plan was to get there before midnight, but plans rarely go as expected. A last-minute delay at work set me back by hours, and by the time I hit the road, the sun had already dipped below the horizon. It was around 11 p.m. when I realized I was running low on gas. The dashboard light glared at me, a haunting reminder that the nearest town was still over 30 miles away. Relief washed over me when I spotted a dimly lit gas station sign flickering in the distance. The neon letters barely clung to life, spelling "Pit Stop" in a sickly orange glow. The station was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense trees that seemed to press against the edges of the cracked asphalt. As I pulled in, I noticed the place was eerily quiet. No cars, no attendants, nothing but the hum of the fluorescent lights. The pumps looked ancient, with rust creeping up their sides like veins. I got out of the car, shivering as a sudden gust of wind whipped past me. The air smelled strange, metallic, like old blood. The pump I chose had a faded sign taped to it. "Prepay inside." The station's convenience store was no better. The windows were smeared with grime, and the door creaked loudly as I pushed it open. A bell jingled overhead, its sound swallowed almost immediately by the oppressive silence inside. The shelves were sparsely stocked, the items covered in a thin layer of dust. At the counter stood a man, or at least what I thought was a man. He was tall and gaunt, his face hidden under the brim of a filthy baseball cap. His hands rested on the counter, long fingers tapping rhythmically. "I need to fill up," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the stillness. He didn't respond at first, just tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Then, without a word, he turned and walked into the back room, leaving me standing there. I waited, my unease growing with every passing second. The lights above flickered, casting strange shadows that seemed to stretch and writhe on the walls. Just as I was about to call out, the man returned. He placed an old, rusted key on the counter. "Pump's locked. Use this," he muttered, his voice raspy and low. I grabbed the key and hurried back outside. As I unlocked the pump, I noticed something strange. The forest surrounding the station had gone completely silent. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just an unnatural, suffocating stillness. As I filled the tank, I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced someone, or something, was watching me. The shadows near the edge of the forest seemed to shift, though I couldn't tell if it was the wind or my imagination. When the tank was finally full, I climbed back into my car and locked the doors. I was about to start the engine when I saw him, the man from the counter, standing just outside the convenience store. He wasn't alone. Figures emerged from the forest, dozens of them. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, as if they were puppets on invisible strings. Their faces were pale, eyes hollow and black. They surrounded the car, their lifeless gazes fixed on me. Panicking, I jammed the key into the ignition and turned it, but the engine sputtered and died. My heart raced as I tried again, sweat slicking my hands. The figures moved closer, their twisted limbs creaking like old wood. Finally, the engine roared to life. I slammed on the gas, the tires screeching as I tore out of the station. In my rearview mirror, I saw them standing in the road, watching me disappear into the night. I didn't stop until I reached my sister's house. My hands were still shaking as I recounted what had happened, but she and her fiancé just laughed, saying I was tired and overthinking. The next day, I decided to prove to myself it wasn't real. I drove back to that stretch of highway, searching for the gas station. It wasn't there. All I found was an overgrown lot, the rusted skeleton of a sign leaning against a tree. It wasn't the neon pit stop I had seen the night before. It was just a faded metal plate with the word "closed" scrawled across it. The gas station had been abandoned for over 30 years.